I think we're going to go ahead and get started. There's a few people that are still going to join us, but I want to be mindful of your time and our presenters' time. And hopefully, I appreciate all of you being here on a beautiful October 24th evening. I think it's a gift, and you're giving us a gift of your time and avoiding the one outside. But hopefully at 7, you might still be able to enjoy a little bit of leftover sunshine. I'm Nancy Boxey. I'm the Executive Director for the Lapeer County Community Foundation. We've been really excited to present this series of nonprofit workshops. I see faces that have been here. This is your 3rd time here, so that's kind of a testament to the amazing work that Nonprofit Network does and the valuable information that they've been giving, hopefully you to take back to your organizations, but also for the opportunity for you to network with each other. We're Lapeer County. It's not that large, so the more that we can all work together and share resources and best practices and just, hey, what software do you use, is valuable to all of us. And so I really appreciate that opportunity along with the content. This series of workshops has been made possible through a funding collaborative. Most notably, we received a grant from the Comerica Charitable Foundation. Monies through the Lapeer County Community Foundation, as well as the Lapeer Development Corporation and the United Way of Lapeer County. So just like all of you trying to combine resources, that's what we attempt to do all the time, to bring different funding partners to the table to make sure that we can provide opportunities. So if you see any of those other local organizations, make sure you thank them. Normally Sam is here from LDC, but I think he has another meeting this evening to attend to. We try and stay mindful of time, but if at any time you need to get up, stretch your legs, there is lots of food. Jennifer Phillips from our office, I should introduce staff that's here. She might be out registering people. She provided a great, got together the food for us this evening. Thank you, Jennifer. So there's lots of it. Make sure you stand up if you need to, help yourself. The restrooms, as you leave the room, are to your left down the hall. So make sure you use any opportunity you need to do that. Silence your phones. So if you can put all your phones on vibrate or off, that would be greatly appreciated. And then lastly, I will say there's one last session that we'll hold in November. I will make sure that that registration goes out probably next week. And that one's going to be focused on financing and budget. So everyone's favorite topic, financial information and budget, but very important, it kind of puts together all the pieces that we've been talking about. So again, it'll be 4 to 7 here. We will have food again, and make sure you register for that event. If you haven't signed in, make sure you sign in before you leave. That makes sure that we're all square with the ISD. And I do want to thank the Lapeer County Intermediate School District for letting us use their facility to hold these events. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Ann Williams, and she is our speaker tonight, someone new, so this is exciting for all of us. I'm going to let Ann introduce herself because she's going to do that much better than I can, and she'll talk about the rest of the evening.
All right, thank you. Do we take official breaks or,
However you do.
Okay.
Usually Regina would stop to take a couple breaks.
I was going to say. So as was mentioned, most certainly if you do need to take a break, stand up, walk around. But I hope this is a very interactive, engaging session. Most certainly you're going to learn a lot, but also ask questions, and I'm going to try to do small group work because it's not just me that has some answers, and it's everybody, as Nancy said, networking. So a little about my background is I probably have well over 20 or 25 years experience in the nonprofit sector. I started out way back when with a passion of just volunteering for organizations because I could see the need, and it's like, okay, I really want to help the community, however, whatever way, and thus volunteered with many different organizations. And then, of course, as I got older, I joined boards and never knew quite what that was all about until I joined the board and learned more and more each time, and have been on, I probably stopped counting a long time ago how many boards I've actually been on. And then because of my passion for the nonprofit industry, along with or sector, along with my experience both on serving on boards, being an interim executive director 3 times, along with then I did my own consulting, because I had this wealth of knowledge and just felt that I could contribute to different organizations, board, staff, overall the executive leadership, to really help meet the mission and exceed the impact of the mission in the community. So 2 years ago, I was, instead of working through my own consulting firm for many years, I was looking for a team to join. And so I think it was just over 2 years in September. So I'm no longer new, but I still, again, have been there only 2 years. So Regina, I believe, presented one of the workshops for you. And again, she's the executive director. I am one of the nonprofit network capacity builders, which just means I would work with organizations in whatever aspect, whether it's with boards, as I mentioned, staff, executive leadership, to really help them grow capacity and meet that mission, exceed that mission, and help those communities that really need those services that are provided. So any questions about my background? I'm very dedicated, just like you are, on a day like this, to be inside, because it is important work that each of you do, whether you are on a board or you're the executive leadership or staff. What we're going to cover tonight is going to be very valid from each that different perspective, but it's going to be very valid. And as I just mentioned, it's not just going to be me talking. It's going to be you talking to each other, small group work, large group work. And I do have handouts. As we know, I don't give them out to begin with, because that's all you'd be doing, was looking at handouts. So if at different times as I'm speaking, I think there's a handout, I will go ahead and distribute it. Otherwise, it's all very valid to the topic we're talking tonight about, that in the end, they'll be there most certainly to be picked up. So let's start. So it's going to come up, but just it's going to ask you some questions. So actually, let's go ahead and everybody stand up. I'm going to make you work. I'm going to make you engage here to begin with. Now, the whole thing's going to come up, so don't read the whole thing and then go to the end. I forgot to put my, not showing everything. All right, so I had you stand up. So stay standing if you are a board member currently or have served on a board before. So if you have not, then go ahead and sit down. So if your staff never served on a board, okay, so we've got a handful of staff here. Stay standing if your nonprofit organization has a full board. Okay. Full board meaning is, well, I'll remind you later, is in your bylaws, you should have a range of what that minimum and maximum number is on your board. So when I say a full board, it would be at that sort of high range or the maximum. And then stay standing if your board has the needed skills and appropriate representation for those they serve on your board. So those actually are, if anybody's going to be left standing, they come up here and talk with me. They'll present with me. And then stay standing if you have no problems recruiting and orienting board members. So regardless of your experience, whether, and that's why I want to make it interactive and sharing, because each of you are going to have different ways. You have been successful. Some of you are going to have ways that's like you're struggling. But there's a wealth of information and experience within this group here. So I want to go around just real quick, a brief introduction. Just name the organization you're associated with, and then if there is any what I call burning questions to want to make sure that we cover tonight. Pretty sure I'm going to cover most of those questions, but I always want to make sure that when you walk out, you said yes, you walk away with not necessarily an answer, but you walk away with more information to be able to then take back to your board. So let's start over here. Just name, organization, and then if you have any specifics on what you want to make sure that we talk about tonight.
I guess in the back of my mind, I'd really like clarity on what a board is supposed to be doing, what their role is.
Okay.
Kind of, we question all the time when we vote on things.
Okay.
Or should vote on or should it be?
Okay. Thanks.
Rachel Horton, Paradise Animal Rescue, and we want to learn how to recruit new members to our board.
Okay.
Sue Gilbert, Paradise Animal Rescue, and again, we would like to incorporate some community members onto our board and not just all animal rescue people.
Okay. So get diversity.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Most certainly. Yep. We will most certainly talk about that. Why don't we jump back there?
I'm Sherry Trombley with the Pregnancy Center of Lapeer, and I am new to all of this, so I'm just soaking it in.
Okay. You're a sponge tonight, right? Okay.
Yeah, Kira Casoli, I'm also with the Pregnancy Center of Lapeer, and I'm also with another pregnancy center in Pontiac, and we are having major issues recruiting, and then also I'm orientating and how you get commitment beyond just showing up for meetings.
Yep. Board engagement is critical.
Hi, I don't have a very strong voice, so I did this. I'm Sherry from Community House of Hope in Northbridge, Michigan. We basically are a client help center for any of you guys to send people to if they need like furniture, dishes, stuff. And then we recruit people to any of your organizations. I'm a very good bridge builder. So again, we don't have a full crew of board members, so just wanting to know how do I make that work? Just for that.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Brian Buechler with Equine Estate in Goodrich. And I have a board. They're not very helpful. So I'm trying to.
Now remember, you have board members here that you want to. Not necessarily yours. I'm sorry.
How do you get them to follow through with things they're going to take care of? And then it's a month later, and then it's a month later, and then you're doing it yourself. So that's what I like to find some people that are actually interested, I guess.
Or ways to engage those that you might have. Okay.
I'm Katrina Wandry. Our group is Wandry's Wishes, but we're not a nonprofit yet. So really anything you give me is helpful.
So I'm assuming you have a fiduciary, or no?
I have a water sign.
A fiduciary just means that, right, you are not a nonprofit, but you start operating similar to nonprofit, but that organization sort of has certain oversight over you. So at this point, you're just starting the nonprofit,
At this point, we're just a group of like
or just thinking?
200 people who are helping
Okay.
different charities here.
Okay, great. What about yourself?
Susan Mori, I'm a board trustee for Lapeer County Community Foundation. Yes, we always have the question of recruitment and engagement. I think all those things will be helpful
Right.
for us.
Okay, thanks. Let's jump up here.
I'm Warren Short, Short Spawn Rescue out of Metamora. We're a startup, so we're all new to all of this.
Okay.
I'm Jenny Zablinski out of Cass City for Cass City Historical Cultural Center and Museum. We're just new starting up as well, just came to collect information to see what could benefit us.
Okay.
And continuing to grow in the vision that we have.
Okay. What about yourself?
Nancy Barrios, I'm also with Jenny. We're two of the board members. And I'm like everybody else here to try to find out how do you recruit the types of people that you need to do the jobs that you need to be carried out.
Okay, thanks. Jump back there.
I'm Luann Thompson, and I'm from the Southern Lakes Trailway. Brian, I feel you. We have a board. I'm probably the youngest, and I'm dealing with, and I guess my thing is I need to know how to motivate them to stop doing what they've always done and always get what they've always got, and reach out to further, to new things. So that's where my frustration is.
Okay.
I'm Doug Schultz, and I'm the board chairman for the Flood River Watershed Coalition. And just looking to, we have recently changed from a governance board to a working board just due to a lot of staff turnover, and trying to increase effectiveness with all board members. Some are participating well, but then also to increase the diversity of the populations that we represent within the board, while still maintaining that caliber of being effective. So not just faces for faces.
Right. Okay, great. Nancy, why don't we jump back to your table?
Sure, as you all know me, it's Maxie with the Lapeer County Community Foundation. I'm blessed to have several board members here today, so I motivated them to come.
See, it can happen. You know, there you go.
But I think things that I'd like to have a conversation aside from what you've all talked about is we're a small rural community. We're all pulling from the same small group of people. So how do small communities fill boards, and what's the right board size? Because we can all say we want 19 people on our board, but in reality, if there's 150 nonprofits, and we're all trying to fill 19 spots, it's
Right. Yeah. All right, great, thanks.
I'm Jennifer Phillips. I'm the program officer at Lapeer County Community Foundation in Recruitment. Just happy to see so many people here today.
Great.
Hi, I'm Casey Schlinker with the Child Advocacy Center. And I think moving towards a more working board and that kind of engagement and expectations to deliver that.
Okay, thanks. Next.
I'm Donna Meissner from the Child Advocacy Center as well. I agree with what she said, and we also need more recruitment.
Yeah. All right, last but not least.
Patty Robinson from Danbury Cross Therapeutic Equestrian Center, and basically looking for how to recruit in the area, which to recruit from.
Okay, good. Next.
I'm Mary Ann Harrington, and I'm also from Danbury Cross, and we are looking for recruitments, people that they want to be part of the board, but a lot of times don't have the time, so we have to figure out how to reach that.
Right.
I'm Carol Carasso, formerly director of the Peer Teamwork. Have been on the board for 9 years. We always had a hands-on working board since the inception of this very interesting agency which trains, assesses, and employs the disabled. Of late, many of our long-term board members have retired or passed on. Those of us that are left have a great need to continue to serve and lead and set goals. Our director has brought in some wonderful new people, younger, but there's a difference in how we perceive time. Not that you want to waste people's time, but 1 hour a month doesn't seem to be a problem. And we sort of agreed to cut back a little bit, but it's cut back to such a time where some of the new people just say, just send me an electronic, menu of things and I'll just sign. And that's not the way we want to do things. That's not how we think you can stay involved. That's going to be a problem. It has been a problem. And then the orientation itself, I just wondered who would be the better person when you have new members. Would it be the executive director, or would it be one of the committee, perhaps one of the executive committee? So there's just things like that going on. But there's passing that torch in a different way to approach. We want to be open, but we're running into some difficulty.
All right, well, thank you each for sharing. I believe that's all within these slides. Not necessarily the answers, but the conversation around that. Let's look at, hopefully I put an agenda in here. We are actually going to start with, before we jump into board recruitment and orientation, because I heard some of you are just new to nonprofits. Even if you were here when Regina presented, I believe, on board governance, you can always hear more, hear different, hear it again. Because if we don't base our board recruitment and orientation on a true understanding of what board members' requirements are and how they are part of the organization, then recruitment and orientation is not going to be very effective. So that's where a few slides are talking about, like, what's the difference between a working board and a governing board. So we're going to talk about that, but again, if you have questions, please stop me. There's plenty of time to make sure that you have those answered. So let's talk about, and what I'm highlighting is specifically, as I just mentioned, what is relating to board governance and board, that then goes back to making sure you have the right people on the board, and you have the right set of skills on the board, and you have the right engagement. So I'm basing it on what a nonprofit is. So that it's that background in respect to that. So when an organization, sounded like, again, a couple of you were sort of in that, you're doing great work within the community and you're not a nonprofit. Actually, that's very valid. When I do coaching for any client or organization that comes to me, or person that says, I want to start a nonprofit, ask the question, do you really want to start a nonprofit? Because there's pros and cons of doing that. You can still do great in the community without actually creating a nonprofit. But if you so choose, way back when some of your organizations were formed, or if they're newer, it's based on, first and foremost, what's that mission? Everything you do as staff, as board, goes back to what is the mission. Making decisions, board decisions, it goes back to the mission. And of course, you have to have bylaws. We'll talk about the bylaws more so of how really your bylaws should define certain aspect of how many are on the board, what's that range, how do you bring board members on, how do you get rid of board members. So bylaws are very important also, but it goes back to that last sort of start up there is the fact that an organization, when the IRS gives that recognition as a nonprofit, it's not to the organization, it's to the board of directors. So it goes back to the importance of having even board members understanding that at the level that roles and responsibilities and being on a board. We'll see perhaps sometimes people don't have that full understanding of the roles and responsibilities and the importance of being engaged. And we'll talk about ways of encouraging engagement or helping them better understand that they're responsible for the organization. As much so, or what, more than staff. It's ultimately the board of directors who's responsible for the organization. And I think Nancy alluded to this. This is just some, I don't want to say fun facts, but some facts that, how many did you say was in Lapeer County? Yeah, okay. Within all of Michigan, there's approximately 54,000. You can see how much, approximately the number of people that are employed, the revenues, but especially what I did on the right-hand side on the bottom for board members. As was mentioned, well, I only use 10 members, board members, that if you've got approximately 54,000 nonprofits, that then there's around 500,000 board members that are needed. And that's only with an average of 10. So if you're saying, some boards have 20, some smaller organizations maybe have 5. So I sort of averaged it as 10, but that's likely higher. And even in a county where it's smaller, that's actually when I started to join boards. Once people knew I joined boards, I got like all kinds of emails and, it's like, no, I can't be on like 12 at one time. So how do you spread that? How do you find the individuals, the people that want to be on boards, have the time to be on boards, have a passion for the mission in a very small, in this case, county? But even overall, it's just an amazing amount of nonprofits, and more each and every day, additional applications are approved for nonprofits, and new board members are needed. So sort of gives you a sense of not just Lapeer County's need, but just overall for nonprofits. And it's not, there's well over, I don't know, 1.5 million throughout the United States. What we're going to talk about tonight is not unique to this county or is not unique to Michigan. One of the more important aspects of, and even some of this language is from the government per se, of when they're looking at an application, is that first and foremost, it is the board that's legally obligated to serve the community, which means according to the mission, and has, what I used that word before, fiduciary, in that sense of the responsibility that has been given to the board. Of course, at the state level and federal level, you're responsible. But that last sort of paragraph there is independent thinkers. It's critical to have a group of independent thinkers that are going to focus and make decisions based on the mission, decisions that are best for the organization. So why do you think independent thinkers, or what's an independent thinker, or board members are supposed to be independent thinkers? Why do you need independent thinkers versus everybody thinking the same?
We've had some challenging situations where board members didn't speak up and say, I don't agree with something. It could put the organization in jeopardy. And so if you just got a bunch of rubber stamp, folks, that's really not serving the best interest of having a board.
Right, so it's speaking up when there are decisions to be had, I'm going to probably use the term many times tonight, crucial conversations or critical conversations. If you don't have the people that are willing to do it, they really shouldn't be on the board.
Even if you don't like what they have to say. Sometimes.
Correct, yes, but that's part of just hearing the whole. And sometimes, or you need those voices that can ask those questions and ensure that those decisions are the best for the organization. Because even if board members are not at meetings and decisions are made, they're liable. I mean, if bad decisions are made, rubber stamped, as you said, they are liable for those decisions. Whether or not they choose to be there, they're part of the board. And so when a vote is taken, if you've got a quorum, then whether or not somebody's there, they're part of that decision or that moving forward. So as we move forward tonight, as many of you said in a little different way, you didn't say you wanted a group of independent thinkers. You voiced that in a little different way, but we'll be talking about how to what's best and how to approach and find those independent thinkers and that diversity in many, many different ways for the boards. This is just reiterating that good governance, you have to have that diversity on the board in order to be able to even have a stable organization, let alone a thriving and one that's perhaps growing. And yes, that means also, heard some of you say, getting engaged board members. If they just show up or if they don't show up, they're not engaged. If there's other criteria that you would hope the board to being participative in, you need those independent thinkers and those engaged board members. Again, I'll just let you read it. But the board from my experience, sometimes doesn't fully realize the impact they have on the organization. It took me a few boards, being on a few boards, to really start understanding the responsibility I had for that organization. And that if the organization wasn't being very successful, then perhaps I, as a board member, needed to ask different questions, needed to, of the executive director, executive leadership, whomever, to help ensure. And as it says towards the bottom, if you don't have engaged board members, you don't have those independent thinkers, it's not gonna thrive, it's not gonna flourish, it's likely to go backwards and eventually could just dissolve. I mean, in one of the interim executive director positions that I held, usually if you're an interim, the organization is probably in crisis. So it was an organization that got to the point that I, as the intern, presented a couple of options. Either the board could do a few steps, hard work, but a few steps, it could turn it around, or we could go ahead and dissolve it. And the board chose to dissolve it. It was a small board. Now, again, it wasn't my choice as staff. My choice as staff was to present the facts, the options, to say, yes, I'm here, that if you need my help, whatever, I'm here, but you as a board has to make that decision. Are we gonna keep moving forward and do the hard work that's needed, or do we dissolve it? And it was a 20-year-old organization that was one of those key organizations in the community. So it was very difficult for myself as staff to say, okay, here's your options. From my side of being staff, I would have fought and done the hard work, but what I could do is present that to the board, and the board, rightly so, made a decision. I'm not judging right or wrong, but that's where, for many years, there wasn't a strong board, and doing things like deficit spending or deficit budgeting, which is never good. So boards do directly impact the overall success of a nonprofit. So I want you to talk amongst yourselves for just a few minutes, and if you're from the same organization, maybe go to a table that you've got some new folks there so that you can hear what their challenges, maybe the good that's happening, but some of those challenges. So first we're going to start with just those questions. Where have you found, when you are looking for board members, what has been your go-to different methods of trying to recruit? And then if you were successful, hopefully, why did you recruit those new board members, whether it's currently, in the past, however that looks like? And was there a relationship? Did somebody know this person? Perhaps not, perhaps yes. And again, what would, in that particular case of that person being brought on the board, what was it that that person was going to bring to the board? So it's currently looking at the way you're doing things. So why don't we take, let me get my, let's see, I've got 4:38. Let's even take 7 or 8 minutes and just get our selves oriented around that fact of board recruitment. How have you done it in the past? Has it been successful? Or where it has been successful, what have you done? So small group discussion, 7 or 8 minutes. Again, I would suggest combining with another table temporarily just to get others' thoughts and sharing. And then we'll come back and share as a large group. All right, let's bring it back to the large group. I know, again, we could be talking for hours, but let's bring it back to the large group. And we'll see a couple of highlights, perhaps. This group is still talking. I'm going to break that group up in a moment. You got 30 seconds. It's like being in a Zoom room virtually. You got 60 seconds before you get pulled back to the main group. All right, what were some of the highlights of your conversation? I'll just take a handful and then we'll move into these concerns, challenges of talking some of those through to help you move forward. But what was some of the just conversation at your table? I'll just open it up to whoever wants to share. The good, the bad, the ugly, whatever it was.
We learned that current boards are not, they're not open to having new board members come in with changes that need to be done because they're an outside source. They see things that need to be changed and they're reluctant to do that.
Okay, so possibly if there's part of the challenge of recruiting when you need new board members is a new perspective, different perspective, and then asking those questions that either haven't been asked before, have been ignored before, just not wanting to look at that possible change. So always that challenge. What else? Who else had their hand up somewhere, I thought? What was the general conversation? Okay.
We discussed, the way that just having bodies to fill seats, and that can be problematic. But also maybe trying to recruit people through your committee work, through your volunteer work, so they can see what the organization does.
Right.
Work with people is a good fit, and kind of bring people up that way. But sometimes it's a little easier said than reality.
Right. Good. And most certainly we will be speaking about not just filling positions for the sake of filling them, but strategically doing it. Any other group wants to share just generally what was discussed? Any comments other than still?
We're trying to figure out where to recruit them from.
Right, whether it's a small county community or just even in general, as I showed the 500,000 throughout, and probably more throughout Michigan, where you recruit those board members from. So let's take a look at some of, because a couple of you use the term of governing board compared to working board. I want to make sure that's clarified and that everybody understands that. So all boards need to do work, okay? There's always going to be, but at what level are board members, is it necessary for them to get into the operational side? If you are usually a smaller organization, maybe grassroots, you don't have paid staff, then you're likely what's called a working governance board. You're still governing. You're never not governing, whether you're a working board or just a governance board. You're always, your role, first and foremost, is governing. Making sure the organization has the right resources, ensuring the strategic direction, all those aspects of what board members are responsible for. If you have paid staff, then, especially executive staff, whether that position is called CEO, president, usually executive director, that person is responsible for the operational side, the organizational side. And if or when there could be that assistance needed, but the executive director would be the one to say, okay, board members, I need help raising money, whatever it might be. But the executive director is responsible for the organizational, operational side, and the board is that governance aspect. Now, if there's not an executive director, then it's like It's almost like you're setting rules and regulations for yourself because you're the board and you're also talking about the operational side of things. So all boards, as I've heard, need those current boards and those new members coming on need to know the work they will be putting time in and putting work towards. It just varies a little if you've got paid staff or you don't have paid staff. If you don't have paid staff, then you're more considered a working governance board. But if you've got paid staff, then yes, you will do work, but you're really a governance board versus a working governance board. Is that clear? I don't know why they use similar terms, but because you want us, board members need to stay in their own lane, especially if you have an executive director. Now, again, if you don't have paid staff, then that's a little different. But especially if you have paid staff, an executive director, then the board needs to focus on governance. The executive leadership will focus on the operational organizational aspect in coordination with the board, making decisions and setting direction. So these are some key roles for board members. I've already mentioned most of those to ensure that the mission that is current, that you're very much engaged and focused on the mission in helping create the greatest mission impact in the community. If somehow things shift, doesn't the mission need to change? Sometimes, not a whole lot of times, but sometimes the mission needs to change. That would be up to the board to determine whether or not it does. You're setting policies to ensure, as I just mentioned, that you've got adequate resources. What does that look like? The only employee that you have oversight would be the executive director if, again, you have paid staff. All the rest of the staff would be under the executive director or that executive leadership. So the board hires, oversees, and fires if necessary, an executive director, executive leadership. But at the same time, the board better do a self-evaluation at least once a year. The paid staff generally should have an evaluation once a year, so it's only right, but it's along the lines of the board is not always looking at, are we doing as we said we were going to do? Are we engaged? Then you're going to have boards that maybe are not effective because they're now never self-evaluating. And even around those self-evaluations, you can have the conversation. I heard when I was walking around, a couple board members here and there had to take off the board because they weren't being effective, they weren't showing up. And that's where with an annual board evaluation, self-evaluation, you can have conversations around it, along with sometimes people don't want to stay on a board and there's not an easy way to leave. So you create that opportunity for conversation and you create that opportunity to say, okay, even though you've got everybody, these three people have 2 more years, these 3 people have another year, it's now the right time to be on the board with the amount of work and or the roles and responsibilities that are needed. So it creates conversation, it creates an openness to have that and really in that level of engagement, as many of you said, to ensure that that is people are self-aware. Am I really living up to what I committed to? There's 3 legal duties. I'm pretty sure Regina would have went over those, but I pulled specifically from each one of those, going back to board members of the board. The duty of care, loyalty, and obedience is you're engaged, you make the decisions based on the best interest of the organization, you don't use any information for self-interest or self-advantage. Always for duty of care goes back to recruiting board members with skills and abilities necessary for the organization. And we'll talk about that a little more when we get to the matrix, a tool that you can use to identify what are those skills and abilities you need. Sometimes when we do go out and talk to people and it's like they're passionate about the mission, great. But you're maybe not quite communicating correctly to them what's required, what their roles and responsibilities are, and or what skill sets, is there a good match now or not? And we've already talked about that. Independent thinker, you need a diverse board, and diversity means many, many things. That if you don't have those independent thinkers, those different perspectives, then you're not going to be the best board you can, because the voices are a little less that worldview and understanding. You're not going to get that. And then use the term already, but the time during board meetings need to not be spent on committee meeting reports, but they need to be spent on those crucial conversations around, whether it's financial status, what do we need to do that we didn't get these 3 grants, now what do we do in regards to being able to move forward? And who knows what succession planning would be?
Prepare people to take over the new roles and responsibilities that might be vacated.
Okay, so it's both. Succession planning is, as the term is used in many different ways or many different sectors, is from the board side, that you do have those skill sets, especially probably one of the harder roles to fill is a treasurer because of financial background. But there may be that rotation of nobody wants to be an officer. Or you've got a lawyer on the board and that person's going to rotate off in a year. So it's always having those skill sets, the diversity you want ongoing, and not all of a sudden say, oh, we've got 4 places, what do we do? What are our skills that we need? What's the diversity we need? That also means that if you have paid leadership, then the board actually puts a policy and procedure together to say, what if this person, the old way of saying it, if the person got hit by a bus. I like to be more positive. I say, what if the person won the lottery? As much as I hear it's like, oh, I'd keep working. It's like, no, I wouldn't keep working. Although depending upon the size of the lottery. I'd give lots away, but I probably would be doing a little different than I'm doing now, even though I'm very passionate about what I do. The board has many different policies and procedures, including succession planning, to say, your executive director just gave 2-week notice, what do you do? Do you fill it with an interim? Do you leave it open? Do you have a board member step in? What do you do? Or let's say it's sudden, again, winning the lottery, where'd that person go? Okay. They left a very large donation, but they're gone. So what's the process that would be followed? So succession planning is important on the board side, but also on the executive leadership side. And then down at the bottom there, it's just a board recruitment policy. If you don't have a process and procedure, it's hard to follow. So again, some of the handouts, we'll talk about much of this further, but the handouts have some worksheets that if I don't hand them out during, I most certainly, as I said earlier, you would have them to take with you, along with getting a copy of these slides so you don't have to remember everything. Going back to, yes, there's many roles and responsibilities, but more focusing on that board recruitment aspect of it and orientation. It is the responsibility of board members to suggest other board members. But again, if you don't have a policy or you don't have your matrix to say, well, what skill sets do we need, what representation do we need, then you're going to have a hard time making recommendations that are going to be critical and a match. So a couple of you said, well, what is the right size? Do you think there is a right size? There is a right size, but not if I said, for this room, everybody needs X amount. It's going to, every single organization is different, every board is different. Are you a working governance board? Are you a governance board? What's your size? So when I say up there, there's no right size. There's not a number that I can say, yep, if you had 15, you'd be good. What you want to try to do is, from the legal aspect, it's usually 3 you need. For smaller organizations, what work does the board have to do? If it's a working governance board, maybe you've got a few more, but there's also that optimum number. It's, if you get too many, it's like trying to, no offense, but herd cats, in the sense that there's just so many going on trying to manage whomever that person is, the board president or chair, trying to manage all those individuals and make sure they're given tasks and roles and responsibilities. I worked with one board a few months ago that was maybe like 20, I don't know, it was like 29 members. And I had suggested to him you might want to reduce that by a few. Generally, I'm going to say 11 to 13-ish. If you're a very large organization, depending upon the focus, perhaps maybe 15. It's not right or wrong. I mean, sometimes, like Nancy, for your community foundation, how many board members do you have?
Our bylaws say 9 to 19, we're currently 14.
Okay.
14 to 16.
Right. And that's where I said in bylaws. In your bylaws, you should have it what that range is. But as we've been saying all night long so far, and we'll continue to say, just because you've got 19 doesn't mean if you don't find the right people, don't fill it. You know, if you find great matches, good. But the minimum number in the bylaws, if it's 9 or whatever it might be, then you really need to maintain that number strategically in the ways we're going to talk about. So there's no perfect. You have to determine as a board, but it should be in your bylaws, a range. And it's okay if you've got a few openings as long as you have sufficient, well, you might better have not enough board members with openings than just put somebody in the seat. I heard it said a little differently, but that's okay. I mean, that's the way, for many times or many boards, it's like, oh, we need new board members. Who do you know? You know, this person is passionate about their donor, let's put them on the board. It usually doesn't work very well for many reasons. So you might better have those that, as long as you're between that range and you're not below the minimum, have some openings and not fill it just for the sake of saying you've got a full board, to do it strategically. And I did hear in some of the conversation already, let's say you do talk to somebody using some of the strategies, a more focused, strategic way, and you find a person that's got great skills, except the person can't really spend the time that's needed. You want to still engage them, so you can put them on committees. You can have them part of, can you chair an event? And then even some organizations, not all. So committees, generally, most of the committees, you need a board member as a chair. There's a couple that isn't as important to have board chairs, but like the finance committee, executive committee, of course, the governance committee, you would have to have a board member be the chair of the committee, but you can have other people on that committee from the community that are supportive, that might have time for a committee, but doesn't have time for all the responsibilities of being a board member. And then I think I did also hear the fact, well, if they're on a committee, you can they can check you out, or they can they can get a little better idea of what being on the board means and the roles and responsibilities and time. And you can also see how they work with the organization in that volunteer role. Some organizations do have an advisory council. Does anybody in here have like an advisory committee, council, board, even sometimes it's called? That could be another option where if you have people who have skills that just doesn't have time to be on a board, but it's like, okay, you've got a fundraising professional. No, he or she can't be on the board, don't have the time. But if they're on an advisory council, then you call them up and say, oh, Fred, we're trying to put together a fund development plan. Can you help us with that? But they don't have any governance responsibilities, but you keep them engaged by asking their advice.
I have, COVID kind of interrupted some of our fundraisers, but I have a lady that's a wedding planner that volunteers to do, like we're going to have we've had New Year's Eve events in the past that are catered dinner, dance, balloon drop. This year we're going to have childcare. So try to recruit some of those people who already have that as a job and as a giving heart, and maybe they. And sorry, I'm not sharing.
You're not giving that person's name, okay? But that's where if you have them on an advisory board, committee, regardless of what you call it, they don't have governance responsibilities along with then generally maybe it's focus time where if you're having events to have them give you advice or direction, but it's not that ongoing governance roles and responsibilities. So an advisory council committee could also be a way of getting the skills you need, even giving you the diversity you need, but with people who just don't have the time. Maybe they travel part of the year, whatever that may be, to bring those skills and that diversity to the organization. And then, small versus large, I've have touched on that. Just optimize. More people are not necessarily better. Less people is not necessarily better. Each organization has to look at to optimize it. Again, any questions or comments, please just stop. Started to talk about committees, but if you have committees, you have to give them the authority to do the work. In that sense of you have a board member as chair, and so they have committee meetings, they have minutes for their meetings, and they meet and they talk about things that are related, let's say finance. They bring any recommendations back to the full board. If there needs to be a vote, you have a vote on something, but you give them the authority to have that conversation. You give them the authority even to make recommendations back to the full board. They can't act as a whole of the board, but they are going to make recommendations. And then when you have committee meeting minutes, I don't know, that's a little hard to say at 5 o'clock in the evening, but that's part, not to get into the weeds, so to say, but that's part of what's called a consent agenda, because what you don't want to do is rehash committee meeting minutes during a board meeting. I'm going to go back. You want crucial conversations that you want to focus on. But committees, as I've already said, is a good way to engage others, bring expertise on that they're not a governing board member, but still bring great value to the organization. This is just an example. Again, of some of the committees, you don't have to, in your bylaws, generally you have the main 2 or 3 committees listed, but you don't necessarily want to list every single committee. Because every time it's like, well, no, we don't need a marketing committee anymore, and it's in the bylaws. Guess what? You got to go back and update the bylaws. So the 2 main ones that especially have to do with board recruitment is the governance committee. Usually there's a committee where that's their role and responsibility, is year-round, not just, 4 months from now, we've got to find new board members, bring them on, get them elected, nominated and elected. The governance committee, there's a number of different areas that they could be responsible for, but especially board recruitment and orientation. And then the finance committee and governance committee are probably the two main ones an organization is best to have. The others, as you can see, are a little more operational. You can have them if you need it. You've got the right personnel. If you, staff can be on where it says operations down there. Staff can be on those committees too if you've got sufficient resources there. But especially a governance committee for board recruitment, because it needs to be ongoing. You need to keep in contact, finding people strategically, as we'll talk about, and seeing where they fit, what the process is, making sure there's policies and procedures around that. So that's just an example of a layout, but especially at the level there, up there at the governance. I'm just going to, so I already talked this through. Just going to go on standing committees. And then bylaws in regards to, we've started to talk about the fact of, yes, it should be the number of board members. It should actually be in there. Board engagement in the sense of how many that board members are expected to attend all meetings, but if they miss a certain number, then it's actually in the bylaws of what that process may be to perhaps take that person off the board. So bylaws are important on the whole aspect of a nonprofit, but especially the board members, board recruitment. So who has updated their bylaws within the last year? Who has looked at their bylaws in the last year? Okay. Because new board members should get a copy of the bylaws. And you've got officer positions usually in there. You've got your term limits, all that information that goes back to helping those that are, both those that are currently on the board and coming on the board, what their roles and responsibilities are.
I have a question.
Sure.
You mentioned in all your organizations you've worked with, just in general, because none of the same, how many do you have an attendance clause in their bylaws? I mean, there's advantages and disadvantages
Right.
either way, but I'm just curious how many.
No, that's a good question. I would say the high majority. I would say probably a good 80, 85%. Have some type in somewhat flexible, but to say, okay, after, depending upon how often you miss, after missing 2 or 3 meetings, then you have a conversation with the board chair. But yeah, most organizations will have some type, because again, it gives, if that happens, you have valid reason to question it. It doesn't have to do with, favoritism or anything else. It's like, okay, this is what everybody is held to. And that's why with the bylaws and in there, you can go back, whether it says annual self-review, board review, or just in general review to say, yep, remember, or somebody, board chair calls that person up and say, oh, Joe, by the way, remember the bylaws say this. So it gives a little better way of approaching and questioning it versus saying, oh, you didn't show up, and to create more of a contentious type of interchange. Question?
In most of your organizations, were they monthly board meetings, quarterly? Was there variation depending on the?
Right, it's going to vary depending upon how many board meetings that, if you have quarterly, if you miss 2, you've missed half of a year. Most boards have every month or every other month. So say within a year, if a person, and even there's clauses in there to say, oh, they have to be unexcused absences or something like that. I mean, you don't get into the nitty-gritty detail. You probably also have a board attendance policy or something. So you don't put all the details in the bylaws, but you reference it so that you've got that as a standard to go back to if there is an issue.
What happens if you have your organizational structure and your forms that go to the IRS, which lists the individuals that you have in your organization, and then one of the individuals decides they don't want to be part of the organization anymore?
You just update it the next year.
Just update it
Yeah.
next year?
I mean, the 990 is once a year. I mean, there's going to be change in any organization, so you don't have to, even if you update your bylaws, usually you're doing that once a year versus every single time. I mean, the government doesn't want to have all that paperwork, or the organizations that gather that doesn't want it or need it. So it's a capture of the moment, and then the next time you file the 990, you would appropriately update the areas, because the 990 generally staff or executive leadership fills it out, but the board should review it and approve it. Other questions? See where we're at, and maybe take a brief break here. Yeah. All right, let's take a 5-minute break and we'll come back and get into the strategic part of specifically, but I wanted to first build the foundation of why we have to have board members that are engaged, roles and responsibilities, so that everybody's, regardless of where you're at in that information, had that foundation. So let's take 5 minutes and then we'll get back into looking at specifics. All right, let's come back and talk about strategies of board recruitment and orientation. So I'm going to go around each table and give me one word that you're feeling right now. If it's 2 or 3, okay, but just a short phrase or a couple words of how you're feeling now. So let's start over here, seeing we ended over here. Just one word. How are you feeling after that first part of the conversation and presentation? Okay.
Engaged.
Okay.
Very hopeful and more positivity.
Okay. I always like to hear the word hopeful. It's not as gloomy as it seems. All right, what about the back table there? Just one word, a couple words of what you're feeling right now.
I'll say hopeful for me.
Okay.
I was going to say, you mentioned like having a stable board, but like moving to that thriving and growing is what
Right.
inspired me.
Okay. Let's go here.
Balancing between needful and hopeful.
Okay. Between which one was hopeful and what was the other?
Needful.
Okay. All right. There's a lot of need, and hopefully, again, on the next piece, will help fill that need, or at least with strategies. So, what about yourself? Yep, you. Sorry.
Yeah, if I had to use one word, it would be justify.
Okay.
Because seeing this justifies why I have questions.
Okay. Great. Yep. It's confirming or justifying. Yep. All right. What about this table up here?
Well, I think probably confirming the fact, confirming.
Confirming. Okay.
Whatever she said.
Confirming.
I wasn't here.
Right. It's 1 or 2 words, short phrase of how you're feeling right now after that first segment, per se, that first portion as we're going into strategies. That was the question. So, okay. All right. That doesn't change it. Okay.
A lot to learn.
Okay. More to learn. Right. Okay. What about this table here?
Better understanding.
Okay.
overall.
Okay.
Recognizing that there is still work to be done, but definitely engaged,
Okay.
wanting to move forward.
Great.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. This one?
Blessed and encouraged.
Okay.
I'm looking forward to this next part.
Okay.
I'm encouraged.
Okay. Over here?
I'm thankful.
Okay.
I'm scared.
And that's okay. That's what I don't necessarily want to hold, direct you in any type of statement you're making. And so, being scared, I mean, it's just lots of work, but I always go back to the good that then is the outcome, you know, but you can still be scared even though you realize that. So, all right, what about the back table?
I'll say thankful both as someone as a director, but also as a board member. We do already a lot of it, almost all of this.
Okay, great.
That's great.
Okay.
I feel disorganized
Okay.
and frustrated
Okay.
with kind of where things got dropped and what was previously done and where everything's at now.
Well, right, but it's also, as you say, perhaps then at the moment frustrating, but then you have to be aware of the situation and to be able to change it. So.
Jane and I are the same board.
Okay.
I felt,
Okay.
would also say thankful we have one of the best executive directors in the county by far.
All right. All right. All right. So these just show some of, I've used critical conversations that the board needs to focus on versus rehashing committee meeting minutes. You know, that old new business type of strategy or agenda is really not very useful these days. So this just gives an example of the type that, how long are your board meetings?
1 hour.
Okay. Anybody go longer than an hour?
Ours should be an hour, but now they're 3.
Okay. I was just going to say, many board meetings go longer than an hour. And that's where the board chair's responsibility is to help is to facilitate the crucial conversations and keep it focused. But then again, if you don't know, you're supposed to, while it's somewhat obvious having crucial conversations, it's a matter of, well, what does that really mean? And does the rest of the board understand it so they're not going off on tangents and whatnot? So yes, you can have a very productive, very in-depth, crucial conversation, get all the agendas and minutes approved with a consent agenda and do lots of work and be productive in an hour. But a lot of board meetings are longer than that. And if so, then to ask, how can we restructure that so that we're having those crucial conversations? Because if I go to a board meeting that's 3 hours long, or you go to a board meeting that's 3 hours long, do you want to come back and do it again? I mean, that's sort of part of, it's anything we do is to optimize people's time and not what seems like an endless, and I'm not criticizing or anything, but that's what people get antsy. It's like, oh, okay, we're not seemingly talking about the important things. I'm just going to skip a meeting or two, and it's like nothing will be missed. So that could be, I'm not saying for all of yours, but that's something to look at your board meetings and the structure.
One of the things that worked really well for us is when I first started, had monthly meetings. It's the way it's always been. We try to keep them to an hour, been very mindful of people's time.
Yep.
So we switched to every other month, and what we found in the every other month is that board members felt more disengaged because they weren't coming together,
Right.
especially new board members. But monthly meetings for staff is really difficult because agenda packets and meeting minutes, you're spending
Right.
all of your time putting board packets together. And 4 weeks comes together really quickly. So what has worked well for us for several years is every other month is what we call a business meeting, where we do approvals and minutes. We do that very quickly in a consent agenda, so there is some discussion, but we stay within the hour. And the other months are board development, where there's not business being conducted, and all those generative conversations work very well in those off months. And we use it for board development as well. So
Right.
we want to train board on something, or learn about a topic, or bring a speaker in, or just hash out governance. It gives us that forum without a 3-hour meeting, and it keeps business and people focused on one topic
Right.
for that conversation.
Yep. And so that's a very good structure. Go ahead.
Do we what?
Do you get full board attendance for both those meetings?
It is the same requirement to, yes.
It's still part of the requirement. It's not like
Still
that
part of
optional.
serving on the board. But I think it's actually in some ways decreased some attendance, because if it was just minutes and approval and 20 minutes of conversation, you're more likely to say, oh, well, we're not going to talk about a lot, but that way they know they're getting 2 months worth of business done, and and then I have a monthly conversation. And we use our committee structure to help guide what those board development sessions will be. So there's input from the board.
Right, and sometimes it's, as you say, the meeting, and then it's bi-monthly because it's the board meeting, and then maybe, as you said, either board development or committee meetings, and then, it's sort of every other month. But as you're saying, you want to keep people engaged, and it's part of the requirements. It's not like, oh, it's optional. It is part of, because as we'll see here, you most certainly have to inform and educate new board members, but there's so much more even existing board members can learn, so that ongoing development is important. So a strong foundation for board recruitment is going to be a board member job description. Does anybody have a board job description that when you're looking at bringing on new board members, that you have something either to send them electronically or to hand to them and say, or to put on your website, whatever that might be, that describes what a board member does and the requirements?
We do.
Okay.
Add one right along. Our difficulty is in a formal orientation. We've not really done it in any succinct way, and the new board members, interestingly enough, the newer, younger people, commented that they didn't feel they were brought in.
Right.
And it was explained in a way that indoctrinated them into the agency the way they felt comfortable.
Right, so the initial board member job description is to give information up front to say this is the requirements, this is who we are as an organization, this is the requirements, time commitment. So it's like a brief introduction. Then, as you say, most certainly as part of the orientation, you're going to have much more board development on that sense, and we'll get to that in a few minutes. And you could also have like that prelim board member letter of agreement. So sort of like you go on the internet and you search for things. If I'm interested in being a board member of a certain organization, I'm going to go on the website or ask for a potential board packet, and to say what should that look like, my roles and responsibilities. A letter of agreement mean if you were to become a board member, what does that look like? What would you be agreeing to? And then policies, and you want to make sure, as we've already talked about, that in your bylaws you've got term limits. You want to make sure too that you're not rotating everybody off at the same time. You really usually want a third to rotate off, every 3 years or whatever your term limits are. You don't want to lose half your board or more than half your board at any one time, or a third of your board. And so usually it's staggered in that sense, but that would be understood by that person that is seeking perhaps to join the board. You want to make sure you have a conflict of interest policy and have that available. And we already talked about in your bylaws would also be what the criteria would be to, not necessarily all the nitty-gritty details, but the general umbrella details of if a board member needed to be removed. Whether it's if somebody gives a resignation, usually if somebody steps off the board, and that's usually in that bigger picture is a lot of times in the bylaws, is to either remove a person that isn't resigning, or to, when a person does resign, that the board member needs to send a brief resignation to the board chair, and then it's immediately accepted, and then the next meeting officially put it in the minutes by indicating that person resigned and that it was immediately accepted. So have the bylaws, even though new members might not want to look through those, but you're trying to give that information so they're as informed as possible. This is even before you talk to them. That give them the information, as much information as possible. And then you want a board recruitment process, right? What does it look like? who's going to, does everybody talk to people? Do you have a governance committee, as we talked about earlier? What is that process? So those are just more in that higher level, some of those things you might want to consider as that foundation before you even start talking to people. This is a lot of words, but when I put it in there, I tried to delete some, but I thought much of it or all of it was important. It's a collaborative effort between the board and the executive director if you have paid staff. The goal, of course, as we know, is to find the best people for those open positions, given your needs, given skill sets, given diversity. With an executive director, they would give most certainly valuable assistance to the governance committee or to an ad hoc committee. Generally preferred, as I spoke about earlier, governance committee. But again, the executive director doesn't want to be overly identifying who he or she has for bosses, supervisors. But the executive director usually does have play a major role in that, but it goes back to what we've already talked about and seen. It's the board members themselves that are also responsible for identifying potential people and the whole process of, as we'll see in a minute, of talking to potential, and then, of course, determining who, if you're lucky enough to have several that more than their openings, then who gets nominated eventually and on the board. So it is a collaborative effort. Those are some of the areas that when you're thinking about who to add to your board, and it goes back to being engaged. Yes, it's how we run board meetings. Yes, it's the length of board meetings. It's the content of board meetings. It's informing upfront, even when people aren't interested, or you think, oh, okay. Again, Joe would be a potential board member. How do we do that? Where's that basic information? But you're going to look at skills and expertise. You're going to look at what work the board needs to do, as we talked about earlier. Somebody, of course, should be very committed to the mission of the organization. They might have community connections. They might be, quote unquote, resource rich. It may be in just connections. It may be in monetary. That could be many things. But right, you look for who you need and not who you know, and not just to fill positions, to be strategic about it. As I've said earlier, you might better have openings than just to put a person in there to say you've put in 3 new board members because 3 people are rotating off. Goes back to that independent thinker, the roles and responsibilities, making the right decisions. Without that diversity, a board can't do that. They're not going to be engaged. They can't make the right decisions. And ultimately, again, as we've talked about, it impacts the organization. I thought in my brain and it just went right out because of trying to remember all those thoughts. So in certain ways, this is pretty straightforward. Why don't we do it? No. Okay, okay, so that's one barrier, let's call it, or challenge in the sense of, well, yeah, we do want people. We know we do want people on the boards that fill the needs, that are diverse thinkers. The one which is up there, your board should represent the community you serve. It should reflect back the community you serve. Many organizations, such as, let's say you serve those with disabilities, that someone with a disability is on the board. Or if you serve the homeless, somebody that is or has been homeless is on the board because they bring that lived experience to it. So it's also to think broader in that sense of, does your board reflect the community that you serve, those you serve, the community that you serve within? So this is from Board Source, just to give some statistics for those of us that like those numbers, but 50%, probably higher than that. We know that we don't have the right people on the board. And that goes back to, if you don't reflect the community, if you don't have the right people, they're not going to be engaged. The community, are they going to trust the organization? Are they saying what they're doing or doing what they say? Are they really representative of the needs in the community? So you can see some other numbers up there. So a smaller percentage, and yes, sometimes right, where do you find those to make sure that you've got that diverse board? Again, this goes with, again, diversity. Of course, diversity can be age. A couple of you mentioned, and I work with a number of different organizations that are volunteer, and a lot of those volunteers are older. They want to make sure the organization continues, but how do you engage those younger? There's also looking at the expectations of different generations of being on a board and what that takes and how information is even shared or gathered. So diversity, well, certainly is many different things that is important to strategically try to find those board members. And you say, well, that's why we're here tonight, is we can't find them. So it's filling the gaps, and we spoke about earlier, that succession aspect of it. Yes, for the immediate, but if somebody just rotate off, you've got a great chair. It's very common on a lot of boards that the 2 or 3 people that are in the officer position, they keep rotating around because people either are uncomfortable, aren't ready, they don't want to step into those officer positions. I mean, I think I'm not on a whole lot of boards anymore just because of the work I do, but I don't know how many boards a number of years ago I joined, and it's like, I just want to be a board member. I know I can bring my experience and background to it. And it was like, probably within like 3 or 4 months, I was a treasurer or something, or I was a secretary, or I was a chair. Like a few months, I was a chair. It's like, no, I really don't want to. I mean, I'll do it, but that's not why I joined. I joined to bring my skills. So that succession is important, and to help. Even up front, set that expectation, the fact that if you're going to join the board, we want everybody to eventually rotate through those officer positions, so that that is equally shared, and that everybody can experience those particular roles.
I've been trying to get out of board chair position for 3 years, and
Yep.
2 VPs of job changes or moves or admin things.
Yeah, I'm working with a couple boards now. It's just like, right, they say, and we're doing some strategic planning, and so, like, on one of the questions, which is not typical, but on the strategic planning survey, it was like board engagement and listing, like, which one of those do you think you do well, and one was to serve in all positions, and because this particular board, right, you've got the 2 or 3 people, this is how many years, or it's like, oh, so-and-so's chair, yep, they're going to be for the next 3 years. Even though the bylaws usually say there's a limit to the officer positions. Well, the bylaws usually also say with approval of the board, you can go ahead and do that. But again, then that puts the onus on those individuals that will step up. So it's also, like Nancy said, it's helping do board development and helping people be comfortable stepping into those positions. instead of just saying, oh, we're having officer elections in 3 months. Do you want to move into the chair position or vice chair, whatever? People are going to be a little resistant. So help grow them into those positions, and that's succession planning. So if you build a board matrix, we haven't yet got to the point, well, where do you find these people, or how do you strategically identify them? And this is pretty basic, you can put it whatever form and shape you would like to. A couple of the handouts have different, I'm going to call them tables, but whatever way you can, you want to have some type of matrix where you're looking at your current board members and what are those areas. Again, it can be age, it can be race, ethnicity, those lived experience, it can be, you know, whatever that criteria is that you want to make sure your board has representation of. So first you list the current members and then where they fall within that, because then that can also help to say, well, these 3 people are rotating off the skills. Rotating off, right, we need that lawyer because the person's rotating off. So it's a more focused, strategic way of saying, what's our priorities? That even if you find a good person, as we talked about earlier, it's not to engage them, but maybe not in a board position, maybe it's a committee, maybe it's an advisory council, or volunteering in some other way. And then sharing the matrix with, I mean, likely either the board chair or the executive director might have this matrix to be able then to distribute it or show or talk about it, at least to say, we need these board members with these types of skills, backgrounds, representation. And so it's going to be more strategic versus saying, that's right, I know Fred, I'm going to go talk to Fred. Of being strategic in what you're looking for and everybody knowing that and trying to identify people they know, which we'll talk about in a couple minutes, that sphere of influence of how to identify or find ways, places for potential board members. So does anybody use a matrix type of, how do you keep track of, like, what do you need?
We don't use, I'm talking about not the foundation, but in my real life. We last year did this.
Okay.
Because we represent the whole state.
Right.
And so I literally marked where our members were from the state and where our board members were. There was this huge, vast space in Southwest Michigan where we did not have anyone representing them. So we made a conscious effort, and now
Right.
this
Yep.
year we have potentially 2 being added. So it's a little bit different from what
Right.
you're talking about, but similar idea, and it was just very eye-opening for us to like literally map it out. This is the same idea.
Right, it's to create a cohesive awareness of where your needs and your gaps are. And if there's not something visible for most people, you're going to think of a certain perspective, you're not going to see the gaps. So by whatever way you would want to, whether this or, as you said, some other way of being able to identify those gaps, and then strategically, as you said, okay, we really need to focus on this area because we really don't, or these areas we don't have representation. Anybody else use a matrix or some form of a purposeful way of seeing where your gaps are? The suggestion would be, it doesn't have to be like this, it's pretty basic, but create your own. What is it that you need? And then strategically, when it comes, who's rotating off, it's like, oh, that person in the first column's got law experience, as I said. That person's going to rotate. They've served their term limits. We want to be looking like now and not 6 months before that person rotates off.
We use 3 documents. We use similar to this.
Okay.
It's a pretty robust
Yeah.
matrix of all sorts of different categories that we track board members because we have to be representative of the whole county.
Right.
Similar to what Dana did. We physically put dots on the map of where our board members live in the county, or if they're out of county. Our second map is where they work. So what is their representation
Right, yep.
in the county? And that is, there's always swaths of your county that we're like, okay, we have to really focus on having a voice that's not represented. So we use 3 different
Okay.
pieces
that help you see the gaps, right?
It doesn't always fill them. So
Well,
yeah,
right,
where do we
right.
find it, you know, how do we find that
Right.
person in Otter Lake?
But first and foremost, you really need to strategically identify the gaps.
Right.
And then you can purposely say, okay, how and where do we find perhaps those individuals? That if a certain area is not being represented, if we keep focusing in another area, we're not going to find that unless we're aware of, oh, it's like we have to look over here or in a different area of the county to do that. So there's no right or wrong in doing a matrix. It's make it your own, but do it strategically. This is a sample of a job description. You can be very broad, board member, but you can also be very specific to say you're looking for a lawyer, you're looking in this case an advocacy professional, that somebody might have that background, and we're looking to add a person to the board so that when you do start looking in your various spheres of influence and methods, because I know when I look at something, I want a little more specifics. It's like, I might be interested, but this is pretty generic. I'm not necessarily going to reach out. I don't have time to do that. But what can help draw the person that's looking at that information to be a little more like saying, oh yeah, I think I might be interested. I need to go out and fill out a potential board member application. So you can be specific, and a lot of times that can help because I know, and I'll show in a couple minutes, there's different, what do we want to call it, electronic, like a volunteer match type. And you can go in there and put specific. You can put generic board member, but you can say, yep, you're looking for a lawyer with this certain background in these areas to join the board. I mean, I know in my early days, when I was looking for boards to join, I wanted to make sure it was a good match for me. I wanted to make sure it was something I was passionate about, but that I wasn't just joining a board, but I was bringing the skills that they really needed. And when it's a generic sort of board, yep, we need board members, that's okay, but you may also be not getting the attention by people because it's not specific enough. If you do have specific areas, something to say, oh, need a lawyer on the board. And again, that's paraphrasing, not the exact wordage, but that's going to attract those that you need as compared to just putting a generic one and nobody pursuing it or looking at it because there's not enough information. So that's one way to start perhaps finding potential board members, is to be a little more specific sometimes in the description of that board member that you need and want. So I want each of you at your small tables, if you're from the same organization, you can work together, but given your current needs on your board, I'm going to give you 5 minutes, not the time you need, but write a specific job description for a person that you need on your board. You won't get graded, don't worry. You can, well, in whatever way you feel is appropriate to gain attention and gain the person's interest of that you're seeking. I use humor a lot. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, or certain instances you use it, sometimes you don't. But yeah, just take 5 minutes and say 2 or 3 sentences to get you thinking a little more specifically for those skill sets or representation.
Help, board members needed.
Nope, what did I just say? That's not gonna, people are gonna see that and they say, oh, I don't know what they really want. And then nobody answers it. So you can say that, but it probably needs to, so what organization are you part of?
Short Spawn Rescue.
Oh, Fawn Rescue, cool. You can say, like, what type of board members do you need? There's specific skill. What's a specific skill?
Right now, attracting and developing donors and fundraising and that kind of thing, we need money to get things built up.
So it is somebody like with fundraising experience. So you could say fundraising experience needed to help fawns, to have the rescue help fawns. Are they, I'm assuming probably, what do I want to say, that their mothers?
Tend to injured and abandoned.
Right, okay, abandoned, let's say. Okay, that's what I was looking for. Yep. Let's say that, okay, looking for a professional fundraiser to join board to, increase revenues to be able to rescue fawns throughout Southeast Michigan. Now, again, if I'm looking at that and it's like, okay, I'm a fundraising professional, at least it's like, okay, specifically if I'm not a fundraising, it's like, nope, this isn't for me because they want the skill set. Number two, it's like, oh, yeah, I'm into animals, so okay, maybe it draws you like 2 to 3 times more so than just a generic, I want board members, because there's not any details there.
So is it beneficial to use like maybe like a portion of the mission statement, which tells what you're doing?
You could it was longer than 2 or 3 sentences, so I'm having you do now, but key words from your mission statement, it might help.
Okay.
As long as it helps draw that person in and know what they're volunteering for. Without picking up the phone or sending an email, those individuals know it's like, oh, they need somebody that can raise money. They work with abandoned fawns. Okay, am I interested or not? If I am, I'm going to reply. Okay. But I know for sure, even myself, if you say help board members needed, I'm not going to apply because, maybe I don't match what you need. I'm not going to spend the time to do that. So, and I know you're sort of joking, sort of. That's what I mean, sort of.
Right, now, is there a way to put something in there, because we're so strongly against decline, and there are some vets who still.
So you want to think again in job description. You're not going to give all those details. You want to attract initial interest.
So I would make that generic. So somebody that supports current best practices, leave it at that. Because then when you interview them, you can get into
Right, or if they call up or email you, you can further give more details. But first, you want to get their interest. And it's like, oh, yep, that skill set or that representation, I can do that. And yeah, best practices for humane, animal interaction, whatever. Yep, that's a passion of mine. So you don't want to get into too much nitty-gritty detail. They may, you may convert them in the sense that maybe they do declaw their cats. Right. Yep. All right, couple more minutes. I know I only gave you 5 minutes, but it's to get you thinking differently, perhaps, is the intent. So anybody want to read their 2 or 3 sentences? So the intent, again, of a board member job posting is to gain attention, awareness, not a generic, because people aren't going to respond. They don't have enough details. They don't know if there's a good match. A lot of people don't know what board members are. So you have to have it engaging and within a very short amount of text, because we know people don't read much. It's sort of like a resume. You've got 6 seconds on a resume for somebody to look at that and try to pick out the important information. Same thing with the job description. For a board member, short and sweet, gain their attention. Yes, then if they say, I want more information, then you can expand upon it. But if I know I'm a professional fundraiser and it has to do with animals, that's specific enough for me to say, I may pick up the phone or send an email to get further information. But generic, we need board members. You're not going to get anybody because, as I said, most people don't know what board members are, and It's like, nope, not specific enough for me. I don't have time to go emails back and forth, phone calls to try to figure out what their needs are. So you have to be able in a very short time. One way is to be able to do that by expressing it in a short job description. So anybody want to read their few sentences? All right, go ahead.
The ideal candidate should embody the mission of Paradise Animal Rescue, advocating for animals, promoting adoption, dedicated to reducing the population of Lapeer County and surrounding counties. The ideal candidate should have experience and a skill set that is beneficial to the organization, while also supporting current best practices in animal welfare.
Okay, that's a good start. I would go back and put specific skill sets. Because again, if it says skill sets, even though I'm passionate about animals, again, it's telling me I don't know if I'm a match. I don't know as yes, do you need a fundraiser? Do you need, I've actually got an engineering manufacturing background and higher education. What do you need from me? So that's where by adding a couple of specifics, we need fundraising skill sets and a lawyer or something like that, legal skills. Then it's going to be much more attractive to find the people and get their attention. Any other quick? Go ahead.
I'm looking for someone who's proficient in fundraising. So our board posting, member posting would list someone who is proficient in the fundraising experience, someone that would have the necessary time to spend on viable fundraising activities, good team leader, someone who works well with people. But most important, someone who can communicate well the vision and purpose of our agency, which is to assess, train, and employ the disabled.
Okay, again, that's a good start, but what we want to do is when you say, the fundraising is specific, but when you say a couple of the other things are a little generic, and again, it's first, how do you draw that person in to want more, to contact you for more information about what is this, you need board members, somebody with fundraising skills or fund development skills, what does that mean? And because when you say the time, they don't know what that means. When you say have the time to be on the board, again, most people don't know what a board member does. Even if they've been on boards, it could be totally different as compared to a board they've been on as compared to your board. So that's why it has to be short, that it gives enough information to attract the people you want, but then they're going to contact you for more details. So anything that's generic.
The first and the last comment I made, would you just combine those and say looking for someone who is interested in furthering the vision and goals of people that we work with in the disabled area, and we're looking for someone with fundraising propensity or
right, you could say. Right, and somebody asked it, part of your mission, we work, and again, I'm not going to use the right words or the exact words, but we enable those with disabilities to be part of the community. Professional fundraiser is not desperately, you probably shouldn't use those words, even though is needed to help increase revenues to better serve the community. Short and sweet. That's sort of that creative thought that asked me to repeat that and I couldn't. But so that's where you have to sort of start shifting. Don't give too much detail. Yes, there's going to be a point where you give that description of very detailed of board time and all these roles and responsibilities. But first and foremost, if you don't get them their interest, you're not going to be able to give them that one. So that's part of finding people, is to have those focused, short and sweet, putting it in areas where, if I'm a professional fundraiser, or that's what I do for a job, think of maybe some of the organizations I might be part of. Ask to see if you can put it in their newsletter. Do they have different events? Where do those individuals, where are they professionally? Meet them where they are with engagement enough to say who you are. You capture that passion if they have it. If they don't, then they're not a good fit. and the skill sets that needed. Short and sweet, that first out there, this is what we need. Don't put all the words in there. Most of us stop reading after about the 6th word, unless it really pulls us in. So a couple of sentences, just to help start rethinking yes, you have to find them, but you also have to communicate short and sweet of doing that. So these are just some of the, these are electronic links that you can go on and, as I mentioned, I forget which one it was, Board Source, I maybe want to say. Anyways, in my early days, a number of years ago, of joining boards, I would get a lot of requests through that, where I would fill out my profile, and then if my profile matched somebody that was looking for a board member in certain skill sets, then I would get an email indicating that they were looking for such. So these are just some, again, these will be on the slides when you receive them. The couple of the bottom ones are Volunteer Match and Volunteer Michigan are used within the state a lot. The others are more national searches, but those are options too. The key would be, even in the profiles, if you want, of course, somebody within a specific area, living within Lapeer County, or some boards, it's okay to have outside of the area representation or where they live. Some maybe not so much so. So you've got a lot of different search possibilities where you put specifically the profiles, the different skill sets, representation you're looking for, and then it's sort of that electronic matching, and the board can go in there and do search for different profiles, and the person that wants to be on different boards can do a search for organizations that are looking for certain individuals, certain skill sets or profiles. So what are other methods? So we've got the targeting of the specific skill sets. Where do you find those individuals? The newsletters, doing electronic searches and putting in profiles. Where else are you going to find them strategically? What are some other ways? Especially in a smaller community, but think outside the box in the sense of the traditional ways. Usually everybody's thinking that way and doing it, and everybody's looking in the same place.
How do we handle, you talked about succession planning, but like an established board and trying to get new board members in, I think gracefully exit the old members in a positive way?
Well, yeah, it's transition appropriately. Part of that could be, as I referred to earlier, the board self-evaluation of really having the conversation. It's a self-evaluation that then the board chair can lead a conversation around. And then...
Somewhat like, hey, if you're proud of this organization, you want to see it continue to live, we need some young board members that are going to be able to carry your vision through.
Well, if your board members are engaged, you're going to keep them on, and that's with the matrix or whatever method you're using to truly identify it. You're going to also say, well, right, it's not like, well, tomorrow you're going to say, okay, you're off the board because you're too old, or you've been around too long, and we want younger. You're going to plan that. It's planned. So it's like, oh, now all of a sudden we don't have, or we've got individuals that do want to rotate all off at once. So that helps you strategically say, okay, by maybe not this year, but next year, we want younger, different age group, whatever that is, but then it goes back to, doesn't matter any age, you need to attract them with what they're passionate about and what skills they can bring. It's like, it doesn't matter who we are in that. What draws us is the passion. Are we connected with your mission? And then what can I bring? And if you don't have those two things, like we were doing just for that quick exercise on that board description, short and sweet, it doesn't matter any age, any diversity aspect, anybody you want to bring to the board, you're not going to find them. So same thing would be, it's like, oh, okay, by The next go around, we want at least one out of the 3 people that we need to fill, that someone of a certain age group, younger age group, however you want to appropriately define that. But again, then you're planning and you're writing the description according to what will attract them. Versus we need board members who are between 25 and 35 or something. That's not going to attract too many people.
One of the things we did, it was somewhat to spread the information about what the Community Foundation is.
Right.
Knowledge within the community. Part of it was just how we start soliciting new board members and addressing the generational gap of how do we start engaging younger people.
Right.
Whether it's a board member, or a committee member, or just part of the Community Foundation. That's one of our board development sessions. Every board member was asked to bring the
There you
goal
go.
of someone under 40.
Yep.
And the idea was, this wasn't an ask, we're not going to go to head for money or service.
Right.
But we want to just talk to you about your knowledge of the Community Foundation, what you see as needs in the community, why you choose to get involved in the things you get involved in. So what motivates
Yep.
you, which the number one thing that came out of that group is they're not asked.
Right.
They have never been asked. And
Yep.
many of them, especially if they were younger professionals, we don't have money, but we might have some time, or we will volunteer. We just have not been approached or asked. So it was, for us, and maybe my members would think differently, it really kind of changes your mindset about engagement
Right.
and what that could look like outside of just board service.
And that's really a lot of times with donors, they don't give because they're not asked. They don't have to ask. And so, yeah, that's a good example of, right, bring them to board, have a session, as you said, where, okay, bring those that have a coffee and whatever, get to know my organization type of event, and right, your board members, bring those within, that's portion that you're looking for. So there's a lot of engaging type of activities to have. It's like donors, board members or potential board members, is you have to cultivate them. You have to start with, this is my organization, are you passionate about it? I think you can bring these skills. Well, maybe they're not initially interested. You keep talking to them, you keep involving them. And so potential board members, we talked about earlier, putting them on committees, asking them to help with a volunteer. You engage them and you continue to cultivate them, because most people know it's a serious commitment, even though they really don't know all the details of it. They know it's a serious commitment, but it's not going to be immediate where they say, sure, I'll join the board. So it's that cultivation aspect, and just even bringing them into situations, as Nancy said, where it's like, oh, I'm not going to come because they're going to, they're going to ask me for money, or they're going to ask me to do something. It's just like, get to know us. Create that awareness, doing a number of different things at once. Question?
Well, I was just going to say, we made arrangements to present at AAUW. And I know I've presented at different times to Rotary and different groups, because you find a lot of people don't necessarily search you out to see what you do.
Right.
You almost have to go to them and let them find out what you do and set those seeds for future.
Right. It could be presentations at professional organizations, the community organizations, the Kiwanis, whatever those may be, in your community. It's also, okay, if they're having an event, can you be there? Certain things, like an example, I worked with an organization that raised and trained dogs for facilities, for therapy dogs or service dogs. And so, they would just be very visible at different events and take the dogs. And so it was that awareness building, as you say. Most people didn't know they existed, and yet by just having the dogs out, that's a little easier, perhaps, that visibility. But how do you create visibility of your organization so that more people know about it, and then they can start knowing more about it, and you can start cultivating those individuals to be part of a committee, helping with volunteer events, and then perhaps eventually the board. So this is a sphere of influence network map, just to also give you an idea that to think, I'm going to say non-traditionally or outside the box a little. This is just an example to say, okay, you've got family and friends. If school involves personal interest, current and previous, so it's just taking it, and it's sort of like the matrix, creating an awareness, mapping something out, however method you want to do or your board wants to do to know where your gaps are. And same thing here is to just map it out to say, okay, maybe if I had, maybe I talked to my dentist. Does my dentist know somebody that's passionate about my mission and is a lawyer? So it's thinking outside the ask of just the normal. It's like, I don't know anybody who's a lawyer. But you may know somebody who knows somebody that at least can do that introduction or that initial building awareness, asking them to come to an event, to volunteer for something if they know. Because you can call them up or contact them and say, oh, Sue, or actually Sue can make an introduction. Sue can let this person know that you'll be in contact with them. So there's that networking per se that's important. And so if you sort of sit down and if each board member did that to really map out their sphere of influence, likely just like a matrix really shows you things you're not consciously aware of. You sort of know, but it specifically helps you focus. Same thing in regards of mapping out your sphere of influence. This is just another version of it, similar, just a different source. It lists a little more specifically some of those areas. Yeah, you're a coach or your kids or grandkids are on different teams or whatever they may be involved with. It's spreading the word and having that network increase beyond the normal, what we think are pretty limited sources that we have to reach out to. Still going to be work, but if you have a targeted job description, short and sweet, you purposely know where your gaps are. You know specifically where you need to fill, or identify the best fit board members. You identify what your reach is in regards to your sphere of influence. There are more opportunities out there. Or what's some other like innovative thoughts that you can think of that you could find board members, collaborate with other organizations? What are some thoughts?
Well, I think your matrix really helps because it narrows.
Right.
You need to know what you're missing first. And I think that really helps them. You're narrowing, already narrow field, but yeah, I mean, I think we've all heard before, if you want something done, ask the busiest person.
Right.
So.
Right.
There's definitely some truth to that,
I think we also have to look creative, right? I think sometimes boards are looking for what I'll call, the busy people, or they're looking for your community leaders.
Right.
Because they view it, I get it. You want a community leader because you want someone that is well-respected or can go out in the community and be the voice. But they're also very busy and on a lot of other boards. And I think you can overlook what I call the average person
Right.
that just wants to volunteer and have a heart. And I think boards sometimes, because we're comfortable with where we are, or we're comfortable with who we know, and it's a little scary to say, I just want to have Joe Smith.
Right.
Nobody on this board knows Joe Smith. And we're just kind of going on an interview or an interest or that kind of thing, and I think you can limit you in that. So I think sometimes looking at those smaller circles that aren't in that professional or community.
Yep. Along with, even though, right, you ask busy people, we also know Sometimes you don't ask busy people because we know how much time you do have to put onto a board. So if you ask busy people, they're not going to have the real time that's needed. So yeah, I like that thought in the sense of it doesn't have to be all the key leaders in the community, because unlikely, again, they're already very, very committed to other things. And even though they might want to, as we talked about earlier, have them on an advisory council, ask them, oh, okay, I know you're very busy on these boards or what you do professionally, but would you have a recommendation for somebody who might be on my board? So it's asking those that are in the field to say, or a lawyer, it's like, okay, asking, okay, who do you know? I know you're too busy to be on it, but would you have, because there's more and more companies and organizations where they are actually paying their people to be on nonprofits or to be volunteering on nonprofits, or part of their requirement for development, whatever it may be, that they're giving actually even time off to be able to do that. So ask different corporations, who do you know that works for XYZ, who works for XYZ or ABC, and ask them, oh, does your company support workers, employees being involved in nonprofits?
There's also a sense in which you don't know people's schedules, and so you can't just assume, oh, they're too busy. You have to actually ask.
Right, you have to do the ask. But then if they say, no, I'm too busy, then you do the ask to say, do you know somebody that might be good that may have more time? Or, right, could you still be on our advisory committee so you're still accessible to us? So we do need advice, then we have access and would love that interaction. So right, unless you ask, but then it also goes back to what Nancy said, is don't just look for those that we know we're comfortable. That's typical. We know certain people that sphere is a little tighter and we're comfortable, and those are usually the people we ask, and we don't start reaching out beyond that.
And it can also be very intimidating.
Oh, yes.
So one of the things when we had our May session where everyone brought a guest, and there was one particular person that we had kind of identified as a potential new board member that represented a different profession and a different generation to our board, and had some great life experiences, and kind of followed up with them afterwards, and what do you think? And I'm happy we got that person on a committee, but
right.
Their comment back, and it wasn't negativity to our organization, but it was like, I don't see myself as part of that group. So if your board has, all those big leaders or company presidents or lawyers or whoever it is, the expert in the field, they might feel intimidated, even though they, and my response was, that's exactly why we're asking you, because you represent a different voice at the table. But some people just, it's an intimidation factor.
Right, right, it sounds, or they think only, key leaders in the community are supposed to be on boards, but no, it's anyone, generally speaking. So yeah, other comment. I'm going to pass around, it's a handout, just board member recruitment process. It's redundant, I put recruitment in there twice, but anyways, it gives you sort of that flow. Go ahead, comment.
I was just thinking of something that.
Why don't you start here and go that way.
Years ago, I was in a church group, and they were retirees, and one of the gentlemen had his own business. He retired, he lost his wife, and he was proficient in carpentry, and we needed something done at our agency, and we hired him, and he was so taken by what teamwork does to assess and employ the disabled. He became interested just by experience, by just being introduced to what we do. He got excited and donated not only a lot of money, but time to building things and doing fundraisers and minor summer programs with our constituents.
Right.
And he went on to be a very valuable asset. And he had never dreamed he would be involved in this area.
Right.
Just being introduced to what we do was exciting for him.
and probably asked, and, you know, asked if it was interested, right? Right. Yep. So a couple of handouts are just coming around. There's two different ones, a nonprofit network one. The other is a, what's the title on that one? The National Council of Nonprofits, just some of the aspects that we're talking about. But let's talk a little more process in the sense of, all right, so you're identifying people, you're asking people, you're having job descriptions specific to what your needs are. Both executive director and the board are identifying those, but then sort of what happens is, you can see from the nonprofit network one, it is going to, after you identify potential board candidates, and you know, hopefully you are fortunate enough to identify several, but even if it's just one or two, usually what happens is that the executive director or board members may meet initially with that person. So if you've attracted them in by a short job description, maybe some back and forth on more details and they're still interested, then generally the executive director, along with usually one or two board members, may have coffee. So what you have to consider is it's on both sides. Like if I'm talking to as a potential candidate, I need to be interviewing sort of that as much as the opposite of you, of the board, the organization trying to find a candidate. I need to make sure it's a good fit upon my part. And so you need to make sure you share the steps of the process of, okay, what happens next? What happens next? How do I know if I'm going to be nominated? So you share the process. And then you also, that second one, it says to identify off-ramps, which just means at any time somebody might not want to, it's like, okay, no, this is, all right, it's not time for me not to do that. Maybe it's not the right organization, whatever it might be, but you know, you keep those off-ramps, because sometimes it is a little cumbersome to say, no, I'm not interested anymore. You know, or if it's not a good fit, you want to make sure that that's easily expressed on both sides. And so you keep those off-ramps available. And then, right, that's even those initial, you talk about those non-negotiables, the amount of time, what expectations are, so that, yeah, they're only going to start when they're hearing things. They need to hear it several times, and then even though we know we've had board members, we've told them this, and then they join and they sort of forget. They forget or didn't fully understand what the commitment was. And so then, again, explain the timeline. Let's see on this. Let's say you find through the process, you could give potential ones if it's sort of both sides are interested. You would have a board application in that sense of what they fill out in more detail. While you're going to be talking to them anyways to say, well, why in the heck are you interested? I heard before, of course, what, expectations. These are some questions. How do you know about us? But you want to make sure that it's not just for their resume, and it's not just for the sake of a personal agenda. Every once in a while, I've been involved with boards or have coached boards before where somebody gets on and they want to change everything. There's a personal agenda. So you really want to try to uncover that, of course, up front, and not allow that to come into the board. But so it's like an interview. You're asking questions to them. Why do they want to join? What do they expect of being board members? So you have a set of questions. If, again, there's that mutual understanding that you want to pursue it on both sides, they would fill out a board application. And then you would have likely your governance committee that you would, let's see, the governance committee that would then determine, okay, I've got 4 people that could be, let's see. Okay, oh yeah, okay. One person has to leave, so we want to make sure he gets the handouts. Everybody will get these if I don't get them out to you before, as I mentioned. Who gets to evaluate them? Generally, the governance committee will look at the potentials and say, okay, we've got 2 board openings. We have 2 candidates. We have 4 candidates. But you want to make sure that, again, you don't just fill it, as we've talked about, for the sake of filling it. Is it a good match? The governance committee would report back generally to the full board as recommendation. You would talk about it, because actually what I recommend for boards is, even initially before you start having the interviews and whatnot, is that you just have general conversation in a board meeting to say, okay, Fred is a potential candidate. Any thoughts on Fred's involvement in the community, his background, so that there's initial conversation up front, because I may know something about Fred in a good way, or maybe not, not so much. So there's general conversation, but the governance committee is going to be the one that eventually looks at the applications, is it a good fit, and then brings those as a recommendation to the board. And of course, the board would vote on whether or not to approve them. Generally, if the governance committee recommends it, the board should approve it, but don't have a person come to a board meeting when you're talking about them. I've had that happen before. In the sense of, or if they're going to be voted onto the board, that needs to be a public. I mean, you can have private conversation around the individuals, but the vote usually needs to be public in that sense. But usually you let the person know, yep, you've been voted on, but usually they're not sitting. Now, a recommendation would be before, if everything seems to be a good fit, maybe they come to a board meeting before that last step of actually approving them as a nominee, just so they can see what a board meeting is, get to meet some of the board members. But then you're going to, again, do the nominations, the approval, and bring that person onto the board. So what's a process that somebody has? Is it similar to that? Is it different? Do you have a process? Again, a board recruitment policy would generally outline so that that year round, how do we identify people? How do we engage them? How do we have board applications? When do they come on? Generally, when do your board members come on to the board? New ones? Like whenever, or is there specific times of the year? Okay, so a lot of times it's annual meeting. What else? It could be a different time of the year. It could say, okay, depending upon where your fiscal year is and whatnot, maybe it's in January. Pardon? Well, okay, some might, but then, and that is okay, but what you want to do is make sure the suggestion would be on the rotation cycle to make sure that you've got as I mentioned earlier, that you've got, even if they may come on the board prior to officially starting a term, that again, then they're sort of part of this, I'm going to call it cohort, so that cohort, when those 2 or 3 people rotate off, then they're part of it. Because if you start and stop, you can do that, but it gets a little messy as to how many we're going to lose, or how many do we need. So a more purposeful cycle, I'm going to call it, is usually recommended. But if somebody's interested, you've got somebody, again, you can engage them, put them on a committee. If it's not time to bring them onto the board, say, yep, let's go through the process of identifying you if you really want to join the board, but nominations and approvals aren't, it wouldn't be till January, and let's say it's June, put them on a committee or engage them in volunteer activities so that you don't lose them, instead of bringing them on as a member that can somewhat mess up that cycle. But put a process together that makes sense. Put the job descriptions, the board application. Make sure you have the parts and pieces, the foundation, so that you can move forward with a regular, possibly again, a governance committee to focus on that. Then I have another handout from Board Source. That is, again, these are just examples of how you can track. On one side, it's the board candidate rating sheet, which means if you've got candidates, how can you know, yes, you're going to talk to them, but how can you track, is it a good fit? If you've got 2 or 3 people, how do you say, well, this person probably fits better in our gaps than others? So it's from board source. The one side, as I mentioned, is the rating form, and then on the opposite side is just an information form, just to give ideas and thoughts in regards to some of those parts and pieces of the recruitment process. And this is another source that has many good resources. It does have a little more detail than the nonprofit steps of the recruitment process. It has an example of sort of that matrix I was talking about. And then it's got a member referral and a sample letter. So tons of resources. Right, it's just one sheet, front and back. So make sure everybody gets one of those. So it's the more concrete aspect of what we're talking about, examples and resources. You didn't have to do that, but thank you. All right. Before we jump right into orientation, watching time, let's go around. And again, just a couple words. And no, I didn't solve all your problems for you. But just give me a word or a few words on how you're feeling right now after the conversation on board recruitment and some of those resources I've handed out. Let's start over here. Well, I started over there before, but go ahead. That's okay.
A lot of good resources.
Okay. Okay. Sure.
The one, it's not major, but is there any recommendation about who traditionally should be doing the orientation?
That's what we're going to talk about next is orientation. Oh, all right. Yep. No, we just sort of talked about the recruitment aspect of it. The last few minutes, we're going to talk about orientation.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. So what about this table back here? What are some thoughts? How are you feeling in the moment? Okay. Always work to do, but good. More work, right? But we also can look at the fact of if you put strategies, processes in place, it will actually reduce your work. Initially, right, to get there, it's going to be more work. But when you get there, it's going to be less work. What about this table here?
For me, it's, the problem I'm facing is the board thinks that they were brought in, or they got on the board, and it's a lifetime commitment. So, but this has given me some things to look at to even open the door.
The conversation, right. Right, and that's where usually in the bylaws you have terms and term limits. And if you don't, then it's sort of like, okay, forever. And that's where the conversation could be around the bylaws that, given the organization, how to grow well, and make sure, again, that rotation, that cycling of board members on and off, you really do need term limits, or terms and term limits. So, okay, what about this table here?
I think what I'm taking away here is it's making me think back on all of the jobs that I've held and the duties and responsibilities I had in them that also apply here as a nonprofit organization.
Right.
It's actually, it's a business. And
Right.
I forgot that.
Well, right, the hard part is it is a business, but it's a nonprofit. You know, you still have to, first and foremost, it's a nonprofit, but right, if you don't look at it as a business and processes, you know, in the context of a nonprofit, then and purposely in strategies and all those, then, right, it perhaps you can't move forward as well as you can. So it's just to remember those parts and pieces are needed.
We used them in HR. You know, a lot of things, but I'm because I'm here,
Right.
connecting them back to, yeah, this is
Okay.
what you need to do.
Okay. What about yourself?
I'm exhausted.
Okay, that's okay. What about you?
Roadmap.
Okay, roadmap. What about this table here?
I'm so thankful, and I'm hopeful for all of these organizations that they've got.
Okay.
I'm still scared.
Okay, that's okay. That's okay.
A lot of good foundational
Okay,
education,
yep.
because listening to many people and hearing that it wasn't done that way, it makes me feel like
But you can, right, and you can help each other, that you've got support and you can help each other. Right, exactly. Okay, what about this table here?
The information is excellent. We have a lot of structuring to do, a lot of protocols to put in place
Doesn't,
to
right.
achieve what we need to achieve.
Doesn't have to be over structured, but some structure. That sort of that infrastructure, that foundational aspects need to be there. Without that, it's sort of like chaos. What about you?
I'm excited. I'm so glad that we all came together today as a board and that we can kind of
Right, sort of.
reaffirm what we needed to do going forward.
All right, it's like, what was it that she said, or what was it we need to do? So yeah, what about yourself?
Challenged.
Okay.
my word would be expanding.
Okay.
Like, just in more than one category. And then I have to retract the statement I made for everybody. Unfortunately, my wedding planner does not want to be shared. It's not that I'm being selfish.
Well, no, we know that because again, it's busy. She doesn't want to probably be he or she doesn't want to be any busier.
But House of Hope is willing to work with anybody in any county. I want to
Okay,
make
right.
that.
No, you weren't being selfish. It was just being specific. So,
Yes.
all right, all right. What about you?
I feel like there's a lot of aspects to that we're doing pretty well.
Okay.
Definitely some things to fine tune though, and
That was my word.
That's okay. You can use it too. I'll let you use the same one.
I think one of the things that we need to work on is like enforcing or following through on some of
Right.
the infrastructure that we have.
Right. So if you set some structure, processes, procedures, you know, you've got something to fall back on, like bylaws. It's like, yep, this is the way we said we do it. Right? Do we need to tweak it, change it, update it? Okay, but this, everybody has that right roadmap to follow.
Somebody has to actually like enforce that and follow through. Like if
Right.
somebody's not showing up to meetings or if
Right.
they're not, you know,
It's
doing
like-
what they're saying they're gonna do.
Then it's accountability. It's accountability, right, to follow through on it. All right. What about yourself?
Fine tuning.
Okay, fine tuning. What about you?
Lots of insight.
Okay.
Word fine tuning.
Okay. All right, last few minutes, we're going to talk about orientation. The hard part is recruiting, although the hard part is also orientation because these are some of the items you really need to focus on. What we want to do, anything takes time, and to do something well, it takes time. And you have to have that, again, process in place, or at least the plan. What are you going to do? Who's going to do it? How are you going to do it? And as Nancy said, board development's ongoing. You're never there where you know everything or you can't learn more or areas that can't help, like the example she shared where you're bringing new prospects just to introduce the organization. But you're helping, the purpose is to really introduce the organization. Yes, you've already had these conversations, but still to reiterate that mission, what's important, and what the decision-making process is generally for a board. If you haven't been on boards or different boards do things differently. It's sort of that working knowledge. Yes, you're probably going to want to share financials, go over financials, go over, you know, give them bylaws, maybe scan through some of the important areas. But ultimately, it's the bottom one, relationship building. If you don't build that relationship with bringing that person on board, they're either going to get overwhelmed, or they're going to get confused, or they're just going to say, no, this isn't for me. So yes, you do all those logistics, that information sharing, but first and foremost, it's relationship building. They can sign a letter of an agreement that ultimately they've been elected or nominated and approved or elected to the board, that you could have them sign that letter of agreement. That could also, as I said, be the time where they're signing that, and all the other board members are doing a self-evaluation. I suggest sometimes to assign a mentor. That a mentor is a person who's been on the board a while, because sometimes new board members don't know the questions to ask. They're uncomfortable of asking it. So if there's a person, Fred, again, is going to be the mentor for Sue that's coming on, so she has a little more of that relationship with a particular person, with the whole board, but as a mentor, so it's like, oh, maybe that mentor meets for coffee the next, once a month after the board meeting to see. It's like, oh, wow, what did you hear, and do you have any questions? So I recommend assigning a mentor for maybe a year. It usually works very well. And all board members really need to participate. Usually it's going to be a collaboration between the executive director, if you have one, and the board chair. But in some way, shape, or form, because it's building relationships, that the full board should be part of it in some way. Can also put a year development plan together, actually, again, for every board member, but even the new ones, to say within the next year, we're going to purposely make sure we do this and this and this. Maybe it's if you service an area, to go out to a particular site to make sure that you've toured that, or that could actually be part of the initial orientation. But what's that development, so that person knows, they don't need to know everything in the moment, that they're still learning. And staff can even be involved if you've got paid staff. Sometimes staff, the person may go to a site and take a tour, and if there's staff, just generally what's roles and responsibilities of the different positions, programs that the staff may be responsible for. Now, it can vary. It goes back to what's going to be best for your organization, what's the involvement. Sometimes it's a couple hours, sometimes it's all day. Just optimize it. Make sure it's purposeful, make sure it's strategic, make sure what I have at the bottom, make sure it's not just a board binder. In the many different boards I've been on, probably most of those I was given a binder, and I can't say I ever really actually opened the binder. I think maybe once I can remember. I don't even remember the board I was on, I opened it. It's not to do it as a resource, whether it's electronically or paper, whatever the person might prefer, because it could have the bylaws, it could have certain information that is important, but still it goes back to relationship building. It's meeting with the board as a whole, in some way engaging with that new person or persons and bringing them on so they feel part of the board. They know they don't have to know everything. They have a mentor. They have a plan moving forward. So it's very purposeful and not just here's a binder, look it over, and if you've got any questions. They don't know what they don't know, and it's a little intimidating a lot of times. So nothing against binders. It's just looking at it from sort of like that job description, look at it from a different perspective than our traditional way of looking at it. And this I've already said in the sense of the board in not just new board members, but actually when you have orientation for new board members, part of even having the other board members there is it's a refresh for them, besides getting them involved in some way, shape, or form. Okay. Now it's 10 minutes to. Let's see if I have any other resources. I think there's a couple I haven't. Oh, the one I'm handing out now, I think this is a board member commitment form. Just as a resource, yours could vary drastically from this, but it's a board commitment. So if somebody, where I mentioned sort of the letter of agreement, it could be a board commitment form like this. but it reiterates what you've talked to them about, the time. One of those aspects of most board requirements is who requires all board members to donate something financially. Do all boards require that? Yeah. So why do you think it's important? Well, number one, to allow each new board member to understand it's required to donate monetarily. But why do you think it's important that board members do that? Okay, they're invested. And Nancy, do you have another reason?
Some of it is, it helps them tell the story if they're
Right.
out talking to community members, I support the community
Right.
foundation. This is why I support it. So not only are they invested, kind of putting some of their resources against it, but it also helps them share that story along with the community.
Right. Along with a lot of grants will ask you, do your board members support the organization financially? And you say, well, I serve a community that's lower income or just couldn't afford it. Well, in what typically it says, rarely have I seen there's a specific amount, but it will say, each board member is required to donate financially to the organization as each person is able to. So that means if somebody is only able, you've got somebody with a lived experience or they can donate $5 and somebody can donate $500, everybody's still donating according to their ability. So rarely, it used to be, and quite a number of years ago, there was a set amount, but that's rarely happens now, and it's usually the framing that I just mentioned. So, and sometimes that catches people off guard and or even helping fundraise, all those things that are board responsibilities that need to be clarified in initial conversations before they commit in the board commitment form, along with in orientation. How many times do we have to hear something in order to remember it? I think it's like 7 times. And we need to hear it different ways. Okay, I think I've given those out. I think this is the last one. This is a thick piece, and I don't normally kill trees, but I know how important it is in something like this to provide resources. Even if I was given to you electronically, I know if I receive something electronically, well, I'm very tactile. So if I receive something more, a hard copy, I'm going to use it probably 3 times sooner than if it's electronic. I mean, I do electronic stuff all the time, but I'm just more tactile, and I like it. So it's not, as I said, to kill trees, but I tried to optimize what I did print out so that everybody could have resources to take back with them. Now, this is a bit more involved forms. All the parts and pieces we've talked about more in the sense of that finding the gaps. But it sort of steps you through different, identify your goals, identify those that you need to be accomplishing. So it's a bit of a different packet, but then towards the middle of it, you've got candidates, how you rate different candidates. So just to give you all different resources, different perspectives of what we've talked about. Always good to have resources and samples. And so somebody share with me what you do for your board orientation. So Warren's laughing when I asked him to share his board orientation.
Because we don't have them yet.
Okay, they're a newer organization, I guess, so they don't have one. Okay. Who else? Who wants to share what they do for board orientation? Go ahead.
Well, new to all of this, since I've been there, brought on one board member, and she actually went through our volunteer orientation
Okay.
and learned
Yep.
every nook and cranny about what our organization does, and then she got a binder.
Well, a binder is better than nothing. Okay. We know it's not the optimum, but yeah, again, how can they best understand? It's the relationships, it's the interaction, it's if you've got agencies, organizations for tours, if you've got staff, It's that sort of immersion into you as your organization versus just this paper electronic binder. And it's creating, again, those relationships, and that will actually increase engagement. That if you help them from the start, yep, okay, you've got a mentor, all those pieces will help the overall engagement and the better understanding of really what the roles and responsibilities are, regardless of if you're a working governance board or you're just a governance board. Go ahead.
Necessarily do a specific orientation, but hearing all this, we will. But we also do annual board retreat.
Okay, yep.
An overnight stay. It was, as the director, it is a lot of work, but it's so rewarding. And
Right.
It's so fun, and you get to know each other. You know your cohorts. You just start acting like a team, and
Right.
it's really a highlight of me.
All right. It's amazing, again, that relationship building, what that changes in the commitment and the overall working as a team together. That when you don't do that, yes, you can still do good stuff, but you might run into some of those things that we're talking about of lack of board, engagement. Maybe they don't know how to engage. Maybe they don't know what they should. Maybe you don't have the right conversations. So it's looking at it from the bigger picture of, no, you can't just focus on board recruitment and orientation. You have to focus on the purpose of board roles and responsibilities, looking at bylaws, all those things we talked about, and then add that board orientation, recruitment and orientation in a at least semi-structured way, process, procedures. So it's not just sort of, okay, we're going to do this. Those that may be interested being strategic and targeted, and then continuing to build those relationships. So last minute comments. I'm usually pretty good with time, and it looks like we have 3 minutes. So,
I'm going to clarify, Dana, because I was fairly recent. I did have an orientation with our executive director and our chair. Yes, there too. And we do have a big binder too, but Nancy recommended.
it's okay.
It.
That's okay. Well, usually maybe people will look at it like the first, after they get it and flip through it, but, and as I said, there's nothing against binders, but there's more to it than binders. Did you have a comment, Nancy?
I was just going to say, and I don't know if it's relevant to now, but one of the things with all of our boards is to remember they're volunteers. And I think from a staff standpoint, and it might struggle to go both ways, is staff expects a lot from board
Right.
expects a lot from staff, obviously we're paid.
Right.
And so you have to remember, these are people that are taking generous time out of
Right.
their schedules to help your organization, and it should be fun.
Right.
Maybe we don't have as much fun as we should, but I think we have fun, and we make sure we build in some social time.
Right, yep, exactly.
Specifically for board to
Yep.
relationship build. So, we went out to Sutherland Nature Center just to learn more about one of our grantees, and had a cookout, and brought spouses, and just
Yep.
tried to make it something more than, we have to go to these meetings and do all this hard work
Right.
every single month. And you kind of forget, why we're here.
Right.
And to build that relationship.
Right, and that's, right, I was going to say that a couple times, and it didn't quite come out of my mouth, in the sense of right, staff does, if you've got staff does tremendous amount of work to help the board, but it also is really, as, especially the executive director, it really is sort of part of your job to help direct the board and what they need to know, because they're volunteers. They don't, some may know, some may not. So really it's sort of to support that, the board. And as you said, create those relationships on something other than just all the hard work everybody's doing, and to realize and celebrate that. Celebrate the good that's being done and the time that's being put in. Even though it doesn't seem like you're moving far, you're still doing good. So you've got to celebrate that when you can. All right, it is 7 o'clock. I believe I gave you all the handouts I have. I will make sure that Nancy gets a link or copy of these slides so she can send those out to you. So I hope you learned a lot in the 3 short hours we had.
So thank you very much. I appreciate it. Just so everybody knows, our next session is November 14th, same time and same place here. It'll be on finance and budgeting, our favorite topics. I said that earlier. You will receive a link for a survey. We please ask that you fill out the survey for the session so that we can have good feedback, not only for Nonprofit Network, but for our programming moving forward, things that you might like to see. If you ever have any comments, make sure you send them my way as well.
Actually, I don't think you guys got these.
We're looking to maybe do another
Sorry,
series
one
next
last
year.
handout.
And I appreciate your time. So have a great evening.
Right, there's one last handout coming around on board orientation, so